Здравствуйте. Я очень рад быть с вами в Новосибирске. Вчера я думал, я очень хорошо говорю по-русски. Я должен с вами по-русски сказать. Но мои русские друзья сказали мне нет. So I will continue the rest of my talk in English. I'm very happy to see you here. I will be talking about mobile game development. And let me briefly introduce myself, and let's start with the most difficult part, how to pronounce my name. This is how it's written in Russian. I'm Krzysztof Szafranek. And since 2001, I was involved with the web. So in 2001, I did my first website. And since 2005, I'm happy to get paid for making stuff on the web. However, in 2012, something has changed because I was hired to work on HTML5 game. And I stopped working on websites and web applications. I started to move to games. First, it was JavaScript and HTML5, but then something changed again, and I switched to native development. And before I did that, native development always felt to me like a dark side, something very mysterious, very difficult, and slightly strange. But it turned out that the company I was working for, and I'm still there, it's called Wuga, is a nice place to work. It's a company from Berlin. It's about 270 people from 40 different countries, including Russia. In fact, my product manager happens to be from Moscow. She's a Russian person. And specifically right now, I'm working on a game called Jelly Splash. So Jelly Splash looks like that. It's a puzzle game. It's free to download, free to play. In fact, 98% or roughly 98% of our people don't pay anything for playing this game. It's a game where you have to match jellies of the same color. This is how it's demonstrated on the movie playing behind me. And you can also compete with your friends, but if you don't really like to do that, you can also play on your own. The game is running on different platforms. It's on Facebook using Flash, but also on mobile platforms. Most of our users are right now on mobile, either on iOS, and this is a part of Jelly Splash team where I'm involved because I'm iOS developer, and also on Android. Later on in the following part of the talk, I will explain you how we are supporting these multiple platforms. So now just a few more numbers about Jelly Splash. The game was launched in August last year, and since that time we have about 45 million downloads. This is a number from middle of March, so by today it could be approaching 50 million people, and this is including all platforms, so Facebook on the web, and iOS and Android. Right now we have about 3 million people that play the game every single day. So in the last 24 hours, we had about 3 million people on all these 3 different platforms. About half of the users are from iOS. They played so far about 4 billion rounds, which translates to about 500 billion seconds. And that translates to about 40,000 years that our users have spent playing this game. So that's enough of introduction, and let me go to the core of this talk. Today, I would like to cover 3 main areas. The first one is how we support multi-platform strategy at Wuga. I showed you that we support Facebook, Android, and iOS, so I will talk how we are doing this. Also, how we are doing data-driven design of new features. And finally, we don't employ any tester at Wuga, so I will show you how we are doing QA. So let's start with our multi-platform strategy. At Wuga, we have tried pretty much everything to support mobile. About 2 years ago, the founders of our company have recognized that mobile is going to grow very quickly. And at the time, we didn't have a single mobile game. Everything was on Facebook. The first thing that we have tried out was HTML5. And in fact, I was hired to work on the first HTML5 game. We developed such game. It was called Packet Island. And in the end, it turned out it didn't really work out for us. So we released this as open source. You can find the code for Packet Island on GitHub. And what was the issue? Well, we managed to complete the game, to finish the game, but performance was just not there. And I'm not saying that you cannot have a well-performing, fast game in HTML5. However, we learned that to get 60 frames per second, to get very smooth user experience on mobile, it just takes way more effort for us at least at the time, 2 years ago, than just to do it natively, where this kind of performance is way faster and easier to achieve. However, I'm not recommending to you that everyone should go for native apps. In fact, native apps can be very annoying. How many of you have seen this cartoon from XKCD? So very few, but some fans of XKCD here. Essentially, it shows that whenever you visit a website and you are prompted on your iPhone or Android phone with a pop-up prompting you to install an app, it can be very annoying if you just want to visit a website, get to your content quickly, and close the browser. Also, HTML5 has other benefits. You probably already have a website. So to adapt it to mobile so it will work well as a responsive site is probably cheaper and faster than to develop a native app. You may also not have the expertise, so you may need to hire extra developers to do a native app. And finally, HTML5 or HTML as such works pretty much everywhere already. So even if you have Windows Phone or something more obscure, not to mention iOS or Android, HTML5 will work there out of the box. So we still have to solve this problem at Wooga. We recognize that the most important platform for us is iOS on mobile. This is where most of the mobile revenue is coming from, but Android is also growing very quickly. And just to prove this, here are some numbers from App Annie. App Annie is an analytics company that gathers data from Google Play Store and from App Store. And the chart on the left shows that Android has already surpassed iOS when it comes to the number of downloads. And when it comes to revenue, Android at this point is about a year behind compared to iOS, but it's already quite a huge number. So at this point, Android will bring you about the same revenue as on iOS you could expect 1 year ago. So we had to solve this problem, and the approach that we tried out next was just to develop one of our hit games. It was the biggest game Wooga had at the time. It was called Diamond Dash, and we decided to outsource development of this game to another company that built it from scratch in C++ on Android. This approach brought us this game to Android, but it was quite costly operation, and also the game is behind compared to iOS version. So any feature that is developed for iOS will take a few extra months to get to Android. We are still supporting this game. It's still developed by this other external company, but we also realized that we have to try something new, something else. If you go to Wooga right now, you will learn that a lot of new games that we are making at the moment are made with a technology called Unity 3D. It's a game engine that allows you to make 3D games, but also 2D games for pretty much every platform. Here you have some icons showing all the supported platforms from Unity. It means that you develop the game once, and with some tweaks, you can deploy it pretty much everywhere, on desktop, on mobile, and on mobile pretty much on every major platform. So if you are interested in supporting several platforms and develop games, Unity is a very good option to consider. But again, it's not an option for everyone. If you don't have a game, if you have a different app, Unity will not really help you. So these are approaches that we have tried at Wooga, but it's still not something that we are actually doing in Jelly Splash. In Jelly Splash, we are doing something else, and we are using something called App Portable. How many of you have heard about App Portable? Very few people. So briefly to explain it, App Portable is essentially an engine that allows you to write Objective-C code, compile it natively to Android, and run it there. That means we take the code base we originally created for iOS, and then it's recompiled, and it's running at native speed without virtual machine on Android. So it's very fast, and also it's fast to develop. It turned out that it took us just a few weeks to take our iOS code base, port it with some tweaks to Android. It doesn't mean that it will work fully out of the box, but it was way faster than just to build everything from scratch using C++. And also the product is open source. it has some limitations. If you would like to use some more advanced features like Facebook integration, there is also more advanced edition that you have to pay for, but the basic version that allows you to play with it and even build fully functional apps, it's available as open source for free. So in the end, we end up with creature like that. We have iOS version of our application, and then we compile it to Android, and we have to add some tweaks. For instance, Android offers many more screen resolutions that you have on Apple platforms, so we have to change the game slightly for that. And there are other differences, like different support for payments compared to iOS. Also, if you are into developing games, there are some very game-specific issues that you have to cover. For instance, performance of animations that are using UIKit, the UI framework on iOS, is slightly worse on Android. They support it, you can use UIKit, but it turned out for us that for high-performance parts of a game, we need to use Cocos2D. Cocos2D is a game framework, and most of Jelly Splash is implemented using this framework. And finally, we are using, instead of UI Builder offered by Apple, we are using Cocos Builder, a different tool, open source tool, which personally, I see some limitations there. It's not as polished as the tool offered by Apple, but you can still use it. So this is what we did at Wooga, but how does it translate to your requirements? I would like to suggest you a few questions that you should answer whenever you have to decide what your mobile strategy is going to be. So first question should be, do you really need an app? Maybe a website, a responsive website, will just be enough. It will work pretty much everywhere immediately without supporting specific platforms. Secondly, you have to wonder and consider which platforms do you need to support. If you really have to deploy everywhere, then again, maybe web will be the best solution. If you can focus only on very specific platform like iOS and ignore everything else, then going for native may be a better solution. And finally, can you really deliver high quality on all the platforms that you decide to support? You may make the decision, okay, I will support Windows Mobile, I will support Android, iOS, but do you really have the resources to develop a native app with good quality on every of these platforms? And again, HTML5 could be an option. So that was the first part about supporting multi-platform. The second part is about how we are doing data-driven design. There is a phenomena called HIPPO, and I'm not going to talk about animals here, because HIPPO is also an acronym that stands for Highest Paid Person's Opinion. I'm sure that many of you have participated in meetings where there is one person who not necessarily is the smartest person in the room, but because of his salary and his position, he is always making decisions. There are some benefits to do that, but also a lot of issues with that, because this person may not make the best decision. It's much more reliable, much more smart to get the data and then base your decision on that data. How we are approaching this problem at Wooga? Well, we put a lot of effort into gathering metrics from our games, see what they tell us, and then drive our design accordingly. To achieve that, we first have an analyst in every game that is already in production, that is already live. So we have a dedicated person whose only job is to measure things and tell us what these numbers are telling about the game performance. We also, on top of that, we have a separate business intelligence team. These people are providing us with infrastructure to measure things and to get a lot of information from that. And finally, this is slightly unique to Wooga. Everyone who is working at Wooga have access to all the other games that we are developing and all the numbers generated by these games. So for instance, in Jelly Splash, if you would like to see what other game teams are learning at the moment, we have access to all their data, including payments, including number of users, and everything that is even more detailed. So does it mean that you should measure everything? Not really. You should really focus on things that are relevant. In our case, it means that we decided not to measure things related to demographic information, for instance. So we are not really interested if our users are mostly female, white, in this kind of details. What we are really focused on is things that we can do something about this, things that we can influence. In practice, it means that we are measuring bookings, so how much revenue the game brings, how many new users we are getting every day, and much more. Also, we are measuring all the errors that are coming from the game. We measure session length, which means how much time people spend playing each round. We measure engagement. Engagement is something very specific to the game. In case of puzzle game like Jelly Splash, it could mean how many jellies they will splash in one round, how much time they will spend fighting with different obstacles in the game. Churn rate means how many people will lose because the level is too difficult for people to beat. And much, much more. For instance, effectiveness of marketing campaigns and very specific features in the game. Which tools are we using for that? Well, there is one tool that everyone here can use. The basic version is available for free. It's called App Any. It provides you with some high-level overview of performance of games in App Store. So you can see which games are top grossing, not only games, but all apps. And you can also dig down this data per country. But at Wooga, we also decided to build our own infrastructure to have much more information. So let me give you a quick rundown of this infrastructure. So we start with game clients, and this is not only about mobile, also Facebook clients, and on mobile it's both iOS and Android. They are sending HTTP requests to our servers, which then go through Nginx and then send it to Apache Kafka. Apache Kafka is a publish-subscribe messaging system that is temporarily storing this information, and then we have so-called consumers that get this information from Kafka. The first one is just MySQL database. We are using MySQL to generate email reports. Every day you go to Wooga in the morning, you will receive an email about your game and how it was performing in the last 24 hours. So whenever there is some problem, like we have drop in users, or maybe something spectacular happened because Apple gave us featuring in App Store, we'll know from this reporting email. However, our main database is Exasol. It's slightly less popular database. However, it's an in-memory database, which means that it's performing really well on analytics operations. So whenever you need to get some statistics about your data, Exasol is performing really well. We use Exasol to power dashboards that our analysts in game teams are using to get information. I would like to show you two of these dashboards. The first one, unfortunately, I had to hide our amazing numbers from you. This dashboard is something that we have on the screen in the room where Jelly Splash team is sitting. And whenever we see any of the numbers behaving suspiciously, for instance, this one went to 0 last week for about 1 hour, and it gave us a lot of stress. Luckily, we fixed that. So this is a very high-level overview of what's going on in the game right now. And this dashboard is updated every 1 minute, so very frequently. But we also have much more detailed information. So this is a dashboard that is mostly used by analysts, but also by designers and product people. And again, I had to remove the numbers, but just to give you an idea how much we are measuring. So essentially every specific feature in the game is something that we generate a lot of data from, and then we are using this data to see what's performing well and what should be changed. We are also doing a lot of A/B testing. Again, I would like to ask you how many of you are familiar with A/B tests? So quite a lot. For those who haven't done it before, A/B test is essentially a way to compare performance of two different versions of some aspect of your application. For instance, on this screenshot, you see a startup screen for Jelly Splash. On the left side, you see the older version, and on the right side, there is a version featuring a feature we call Boost. We are not really sure how it will perform, whether people will like it or not, so initially we just send it to about 10% of our users. Right now, it turned out that people like it, which means that in the future we'll deploy to 100% of users. I would like to mention here that it's extremely helpful to have a web version of our game working on Facebook, because compared to iOS, updating something and doing A/B testing on Facebook is much faster. Because whenever you would like to change something, you just change the game on the server and people will see it immediately. So it's really perfect for A/B testing. One word of warning about A/B testing. It's something that is very helpful to tweak the game. But if you have broken design from the beginning, like on this DVD rewinder, no amount of A/B testing will help you. So remember, A/B testing is for tweaking, not for designing something from scratch. You should start with good game, or at least a decent game from the beginning. And the last point is how we are doing QA. This is team working on Jelly Splash on all 3 platforms. You don't know these people, but there are product managers here, designers, artists, developers, yours truly as well, but there is not a single tester. In fact, in the whole WUGA, where we have 270 people, there is not a single tester. I wonder, are there some testers in the room? Very few. I respect you guys. Keep that in mind. However, for us, we decided, or the founders of the company decided, that if we will not have testers, maybe development teams will take care more about the product and the quality of a product. So I think they were probably not sure how it will work out, but in the end, after 5 years of WUGA, it turned out to be working quite well. And of course, we still have to find bugs and fix them. Luckily, we have some process in place that is helping us to do that. So it starts with pair programming. We are using either pair programming or code review to have every piece of code checked by at least 2 people. And then we are using unit tests. Unit tests are something that everyone thinks that it's a good thing, that you should do it. Not everyone is doing this in practice. I will be honest with you, we don't have 80% coverage, or maybe not even 60% in Jelly Splash, but very often unit tests are helpful and we are using them. We also have some integration tests to see how different, more complicated aspects of the game are working. So for instance, to test if Facebook interconnectivity works or if connections with our backend are performing well. Then we have continuous builds that are generated after every 10 minutes. Finally, at the end of a sprint, we create a staging build, and we are testing this in the team internally using a checklist. It has about 25 different options that we have to test in the game, different features in the game. And when this phase is ready, we deploy this internally to the whole company. So with the company of our size, it means that about 25% of people will play the game. And I must say, this is something that can work if you have a game. But if you have, let's say, banking application, accounting application, I will not guarantee that it will work with the same effectiveness. It's much easier to have everyone in your company to play your product if you have a game. So that's also something that you should consider, whether you have to decide to have testers or not. With games, it's much easier. And finally, we go live. To have this process in place, we use several tools. One is Jenkins. It's a continuous integration server. The other one that I can highly recommend is Hockey app. We are using this to deploy different testing versions of the application to our users and also to monitor errors. So whenever the game crashes, we get reports from Hockey and we can get the overview. And this is how Hockey app looks like. On the left side, you could see that there is quite a huge number of errors. This is from version 1.7 of Jelly Splash, and you could see that there are over 2 million crashes that we received in that version. I would like to share you the story of this, and it's a cautionary tale. So it happened on 26th of November last year. It was a very special week because we totally forgot in our team that it's a Thanksgiving week in US, and CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, decided to give pretty much everyone at Apple a week off. but we totally forgot about this. And also, a Jewish holiday, Hanukkah, happened to be in the same week. And fun fact, these two holidays overlap about 80,000 years. So the next time it will happen will be probably when most of us will be dead. So we are quite unlucky with that, because it turned out that we went live, we pressed the button, and then in the next few minutes we noticed that we get a lot of crash reports. In fact, we're getting about 8,000 crashes every hour. And if you now wonder, what does it mean, 8,000 crashes every hour? This is this number. So this is how quickly we're getting new crashes. Each number here is a new crash. It took us about 5 hours to find this error and fix it and submit to Apple. But because of all these holidays, unfortunately, we had to wait another week for approval. And during this whole week, the crashes were coming and coming and coming. So 5 hours to fix it, a week of waiting to get it fixed and deployed to the users. So what went wrong in our process? We did pair programming. We didn't have unit tests for this particular problem, but unit tests would not help because it was much more complicated. It was involving several systems. So probably integration tests should be there, and they were not here. They were not in place. For very specific reasons, we also didn't find it in staging and internal release. If you are interested in details, feel free to approach me after my talk. I will tell you more. And when we went live, it just blew up. So does it mean that we change our approach? No, we decided to keep going, and it's good to realize that bugs will happen. This is one of my favorites from Twitter because I was personally involved into creating this bug. Actually, it wasn't even a bug. It was a feature, but many people were confused about how it works. So keep in mind, bugs will happen, and this should not slow you down. Remember, it's more important to move fast than to be overly cautious. So to summarize, multi-platform strategy. Think, do you really need an app? And if so, there are several different options that you can use to support multiple mobile platforms. Use data to drive your decisions, but also measure things that are relevant, things that you can do something about. It's not worth to measure everything. And finally, use testing, but it's more important to move fast and react to the feedback from users. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Great speech. So, questions, guys? Hi, my name is Slava. You have mentioned A/B testing, and what tools have you used on A/B testing in iOS, for iOS?
So essentially, we are not using an external tool. If we would like to test two different features, we have to put them in the client. So the client has two versions of the feature, and then we download configuration from the server, and the server decides that this device will have this feature and this one will not. So we use some unique identifier, some random number that we generate on every device, and depending on the value of this number, some people will have this feature, some will not, and it's pretty much randomized.
My name is Alexander. I'm from Novosibirsk. Could you? Why don't you measure demographics?
Well, the biggest reason is that we cannot really do too much about this. So let's say if someone is Asian, we're not going to change that, and it's not really actionable information. That's one thing. The other one is, in some countries, there are some policies involving which data, private information you can gather about people or not. And just by focusing on game metrics, we avoid this legal problem altogether. We don't measure this, and we don't store. The only source we could get this information from is Facebook, and Facebook has this information, but we are not using it and not accessing it.
Спасибо, меня зовут Иван, я из Иркутска. Что вы скажете насчет такого фреймворка, как Cocon.js? Cocon.
I haven't used this framework.
Krzysztof is Polish, so he understands Russian a little bit.
So I mentioned this HTML5 game that we did in the beginning, but we didn't use any framework for that. We built everything from scratch. And personally, I'm not familiar with this framework. And the game I'm working on right now, Jelly Splash, it's native, so it's built in Objective-C. It's not using JavaScript framework.
Здравствуйте, меня зовут Дмитрий. Вы упоминали о Portable как средство портирования. Насколько я знаю, есть достаточно похожий инструмент Marmalade Juice. Вы пробовали его? Что-то можете сказать по поводу него?
And now I need some help with translation.
Yeah, you mentioned, sorry, what was the first one? The first tool?
A portable.
A portable, yeah. And there's another instrument, it's called a Marmalade Juice. Did you use it, and what can you say about it if you used it, or?
No, we are not using this. So I cannot tell too much about it.
Hello, great speech, thank you. I'd like to ask you just about the scale of the whole company. You said that there are 200 something people in it. So how many projects do you have concurrently running? How much people spend time playing the version when it comes out? How many versions are? How often the versions are coming, and so on. So the scale of the whole development.
Okay. So right now, I don't even remember how many games we have live because some of them are in automated mode, so they are not actively developed anymore. There are about 4 games that are actively developed and they have production teams behind them, but we have a lot of titles right now. It will be about 10 that are not yet released to the public, so they are even either in prototyping stage or are close to be released. So in total, at any given time, I would say we work between 10 and 15 games at WUGA.
The question is, how many crashes do you casually get per build? And what is the division of crashes per OSS?
Per operating system.
Yes.
So this version I showed you was the worst one we ever had, I would say. Right now, I would say we get, I don't remember this number right now, but it will be probably about 5,000 crashes per week in Jelly Splash in iOS. And it may sound like a lot, but keep in mind that we have about 1.5 million people playing every day. So 4,000, 1.5 million, it's not really such a big number. And when it comes to Android, honestly, I don't remember the numbers because there is a different sub-team working on that. But very often they are different, yes.
Hello, my name is Pavel. You told about the week when your application crashes. Did it affect the number of sales and downloads in future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We're very, very stressed about that. It turned out that there was almost no significant effect. But the reason for that is that not all the people were affected. About 10 to 15% of our users were affected because it was a very specific scenario. And it was also the reason why we didn't find it during testing phase. Only some small subgroup was affected. The biggest impact we had was on reviews in App Store. Because people that have crash, even if they are in minority, typically they will be very loud. And the first thing they will do, they will go to App Store and leave negative reviews. And for about 2 months, our overall rating is lowered because of that. And only 2 weeks ago, we came back to 4 stars out of 5 in App Store. And it was largely because of that. But no very significant impact on bookings.
In your organizational structure, what's the distribution? How many developers versus business analytics people versus marketing people do you have?
So it really depends on the stage of the game. Typically, when you start developing a new game, you prototype. We start with a designer, game designer, and then you ramp up the team. Typically, the second person that would join will be developer. Working on the prototype and making it running. And in live team, it really depends. But I would say about 40 to 50% of the team is developers. Then we have about 20% artists. And the rest, we call them at WUGA PMs or product managers. But there are not only PMs, but it includes designers, producers, and people working with numbers, analysts.
Hello, my name is Mikhail. Could you tell me, please, interval between releases of iOS version and Android versions?
Difference between...
interval. Time interval.
Between. So it depends on the approach we are using. So for instance, with Diamond Dash, the first game that is developed differently, it's few months. So they are behind like 4 months. With Jelly Splash, it's much faster. So right now they are behind one major version, which is about month maybe. But right now we are getting closer. So the code base is essentially becoming pretty much the same. We are going to work on the same branch in the code. And the goal is very soon to have simultaneous releases. And we should have it in the next 2 months probably.
Hello. You mentioned that the question is about this famous week, but actually about the submission to the App Store. You mentioned that after you fix the problem, it came to production
a week later.
In a week because there was a holiday week. Not because the submission to the App Store actually take time. So the question is, do we have some kind of express review or something else that helps you to deliver it to production, to publish it faster than usual?
Well, you may ask for it, but it's Apple, so you may never get it.
Спасибо за доклад. Вопрос такой. Буду по-русски. Насколько сложно было заставить программистов тестировать свой код, и кто был инициатором? Они сами начали это делать, или какой-то менеджер пришел и сказал, давайте без тестирования?
I understood most of it, but not enough, so I need some.
It was hard to push programmers to do unit testing and testing without actual testers. And what's this decision is about? It was about a manager's decision, or it's up to you and developers.
So actually, it was coming from developers. So there is at Wuga we have quite strong separation between the two, in the sense that PMs don't tell developers how you should write your code and whether you should do unit testing or not. And also when we are hiring, we try to hire people who are good engineers and who are aware of good practices. So it's really coming from developers.
Hello, I have 2 questions. First is, do you like to write unit tests? And second, which platform you use to write unit tests for iOS?
The first question is very interesting. It depends on the feature. So, for instance, we are not writing unit tests for UI code because it's very difficult to unit test, and in my opinion, very often it's just a waste of time. However, there are some features where it's easier to write unit tests and start with that. For instance, if you have a game and you have some piece of logic, like how things are moving on the map, and before you build user interface, it's just easier to write a test for that. And then you see the results immediately, you know if your logic is broken or not. And when it comes to the second question, we are mostly using a framework called Kiwi. It's an open source framework for testing iOS, and it has syntax very similar to Jasmine in JavaScript. So it's behavior-driven syntax.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Let's
Спасибо.